Good morning. I'm Senator Mary Washington. We're about to start the AELR hearing on Department of Agriculture's emergency regulations 24-066E and 24-067E. Today is Monday, September 9th, and our meeting is starting at 10:05. The purpose of this hearing is on these two sets of regulations. The Maryland Department of the Environment will present their regulations, and then they will take questions from our AELR members. There's no public oral testimony for this hearing. There's only written testimony. So first, we are calling to order and having opening remarks by myself and my co-chair, Delegate Sandy Rosenberg. We will review the regulations by the Department of Agriculture. There'll be a summary of testimony from our AELR staff. Then there'll be the questions, and then we'll make our recommendations. Committee staff, could you start? Delegate, do you have, my co-chair, do you have any opening remarks?
You've said it all, so let's proceed with the agenda.
All right, the committee staff, could you please take roll?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Did you take roll? Take a 10-minute.
Oh, yeah, sure. Absolutely. Senator Mounts, Senator McKay, Senator Muse, Senator Hayes, Senator Smith, Senator Snyder, Sidnor, I'm so sorry, forgive me. Senator Waldstreicher. Here. Senator West. Delegate Buckle. Delegate Charkoudian.
Here.
Delegate Sample Hughes. Delegate Holmes.
Present.
Delegate Jacobs.
Here.
Delegate Jones. Delegate
Present.
Delegate Williams.
Present.
Delegate Stein. Chair Washington and Chair Rosenberg.
Here.
And please note, I believe another senator has arrived. Senator West is present.
Pardon me, Madam Chair, I didn't comment when my name was called. I want to make sure I was marked as present. I apologize. I had my mute on.
Okay, I got you.
Delegate McComas. You didn't say me, so McComas.
And Senator Lewis Young, my name wasn't called either.
Oh, I am so sorry.
And I'm Chris West, and I just arrived. Thanks.
Okay, all members present are accounted for and have provided their voice acceptance of recognition. So let's start with our Secretary of the Department of Agriculture and his team. And please introduce your team members at first, if you don't mind, and then please get into the review of the regulations. And
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you so much for convening the state of Maryland. And I see my team gathered on another screen under the name Brian Harris. So Brian Harris, he himself is there. Tom Filbert is our attorney with the Office of Attorney General. Hans Schmidt is our Assistant Secretary for Resource Conservation, who oversees nutrient management and would oversee this program. Dwight Dotterer is with our nutrient management team, and Rachel Jones, who you know is our legislative guru and has been instrumental in this. So again, I appreciate them gathered in one room. That is where all of the expertise resides. So I will give just a quick overview and then turn it over to Tom and Hans and team to go through the details. This is an emergency regulation based on bills that were passed during the legislative session. The bills were House Bill 991 and Senate Bill 1074. And what these do is it creates a definition of food processing residual, which is a product that is a byproduct of, in this case, what we're primarily talking about is the poultry industry. And it's a product that does have use on farms, and we've had a number of farms making good use and responsible use of this product for a long time. But in recent years, we have had a number of instances where the use of the product has become a problem. And it has been in some cases overused, in some cases it has been misused, and it has caused challenges within the community. And I don't need to say much more other than to ask you to look at the sponsor list, and you will see that this was a bipartisan bill of folks in rural areas, primarily also suburban areas, and even some urban sponsors as well, very interested in this topic. It is our interest to be able to provide a legal framework for the distribution and the storage and the application of this product that meets our goals of ensuring that we are doing everything we can to protect the health of the bay, doing everything we can to be, as an industry, a good neighbor, and to make sure that this product is safely handled and responsibly used. I would also say that there was a public discussion that we had through our Nutrient Management Advisory Committee, and members of the industry and the community had access to a draft to review and suggest changes. And here we are at this point. I will, if there are no questions directly from me, I will turn this over to our team of experts.
May do so.
Okay.
This morning, and we're getting ready to pull up a PowerPoint for you. As Secretary AEX said, this is to present regulations for Senate Bill 1074 and House Bill 991, Food Processing Residuals Utilization Permitting Program. We're going to go over the emergency actions implementing this new law, and then also this law went into effect on July 1st, and the emergency actions are intended to effectuate this law. We are past July 1. Obviously, the department has implemented some interim guidelines to help the industry continue to move on with these products to be able to be utilized on farms. But because we wanted to move this along, we wanted to present to you these emergency actions. So again, this morning, we'll go over the overview, explain 2 emergency actions implementing and effectuating this new law. They are the action to adopt COMAR 1520-13, as well as action to amend COMAR 1520-0702, which adds the supplement 10 to the Nutrient Management Manual, and then explain to you the needs for these emergency actions and to answer any questions afterwards. So as Secretary AEX mentioned, we did present a draft regulations to the Nutrient Management Advisory Committee. If you're not familiar with who the advisory committee is, they are representatives who from the farming community, environmental interests, and other interests. Some of those representatives come from Farm Bureau, grain producers, Chesapeake Bay Foundation. We try to get a broad scope of folks who can provide input to the department as we administer and manage our nutrient management program across the agricultural landscape. The committee, the department received comments during that meeting based on the draft regs that we proposed. We substantially revised those draft regs based on the comments that we heard, both from the committee as well as from the public. The public did have some comments as well. We circulated the revised drafts. 2 counties that have been have been impacted by the food processing residuals on the landscape primarily have been Carroll and Caroline counties, although they are not the only 2 counties, but they've been the 2 counties that have been probably most impacted by these products. We presented the draft regs to both the county commissioners for both those counties, and they did support, and we did also get MDE support for the sign off on the emergency actions. So a definition of food processing residuals, they are an organic material that is generated by processing agricultural commodities for human and animal consumption. Those products that are included, that are in those types of processing are food, could be food residuals, food co-products, food processing waste, food processing sludges, any organic material that is mixed or commingled with those products that I just mentioned. And any other incidental material whose characteristics derive from processing agricultural products for human consumption and animal consumption. And just also any of these products that are brought onto the farms must be registered through the state chemist as a sole conditioner. The state chemist reviews the test results of these products to make sure that these products are safe for land application.
So, Mr. Harris.
So we had some,
Can't do
sorry.
it. Can I check to see the PowerPoint is not moved? Is it your intention that we are following along for your PowerPoint? Because it's not following your discussion. So if that's your intention, someone needs to be forwarding the slides and turning it into a slideshow mode.
Okay, we'll try to fix that.
Delegate, is that your comment?
Here we go. Whoop.
Can you see him now?
Yes.
We got it.
Cool. All right, so definition of food processing residuals are processing that or what is not included as a food processing residual, because there was some concern amongst the compost industry. Food digestate that has not been mixed or commingled with food processing residuals. Animal and poultry manures, again, that have not been commingled with food processing residuals. Biosolids, both class A and class B. Compost, that is the product of composting in accordance with the standards established by the Secretary of Agriculture. And these would be derived from the final disposal in a refuse disposal system for composting under COMAR 2026-0413, or obtained from a residential curbside or drop-off program. Spent mushroom soil, as well as water treatment plant residuals. So the first emergency actions presented to your committee for approval to fully effectuate Senate Bill 1079 and House Bill 991 are under COMAR 152013. And this is to establish requiring a person to obtain a permit for either transporting, storing, or land applying FPRs. The new regulations are necessary to fully implement the legislation. These regulations, for starters, spell out the application process for obtaining these 3 separate permits. And based on the regulations, the department has specified that the information that the applicant must include for each permit application, that'll be required for the permits. Next. So the regulations identify in this slide set forth the application process for obtaining the 3 permits. So the first one being Regulation 12 for the transport permit. These types of products would be, the information that would be required, the source, the type of product, the quantity of FPRs being transported, as well as an emergency plan for the event of a spill. The second permit for storage would be found under Regulation 16, again, specifying information again, with information with the site plan showing the existing or proposed storage structure, the source, the type, the quantity of FBRs being stored, the engineering plans of the storage facility, and any and a detailed operation plan and a plan for emergency. And then the third would be for land application found under Regulation 21. It specifies the information that a person must provide to the department. Again, with the source, the type, the quantity of FPRs that are being land applied, the site plan showing the acreage where the FPRs are being applied, a current nutrient management plan, and then an operation plan showing methods of controlling odor. For definition, commercial haulers and brokers, these folks would be primarily the people that are in the business of hauling and transporting FPRs. They have the contracts with, or primarily have the contracts with the processing plants and the farm operators to move these materials. They would be the ones primarily applying for these permits. In the capacity that they will likely be the person obtaining the permits, securing the performance bonds for these activities, and paying the tonnage fees that will support the department's administration of this program. There are provisions in the regulations for record keeping. Regulation 17 provides the process of tracking the movement of FPRs from the generator or processing plant to the farm. Currently, we already have in place by state law, farmers are required to provide information to the department on our annual implementation report of all movement of manure and other fertilizers on the farm and to the farm and off the farm. Regulation 13 specifies the record keeping requirements for the transportation of FPRs. Regulation 18 specifies the record keeping required by the person storing FPRs. And then Regulation 22 specifies the record keeping requirements for all persons land applying FPRs. Next. Under the legislation, there is a right of entry. So under Regulation 14 sets forth Regulation 4 sets forth a right of entry that NDA shall obtain as a condition to issuance of the permit. Gives the department the right to enter the location where any records required to be maintained or inspect the records, enter any site covered by the permit for any field where FPRs are being land applied or stored, and then gives the department the right to sample any soil, vegetation, or other materials on this site. There's a requirement for performance bond if you're utilizing FPRs. So Regulation 12 sets forth the process of securing a performance bond. Those bond amounts for transportation permit, it's $10,000 for the first permit. For land application, it's $30,000 for the first permit. And for storage permit, it's $100,000 for the first permit. There is a cap if a person is applying for 1, 2, or 3 of these permits. There is a cap of $200,000, but for each additional permit is a 40% of the required amount of that specific permit. So an example is a person who applies for a permit for transportation to 10 different sites. The bond for the initial permit is $10,000, and for each of the remaining 9 would be $4,000 for each site, for a total of $46,000. Under the legislation, was established a food processing administration fund, establishing a tonnage fee to carry out the responsibilities. As reflected in the fiscal note for the legislation, it was identified in that fiscal note a need for 2 additional nutrient management specialists, an assistant attorney general, and a part-time contractual administrative specialist. MDA determined that the most equitable means to raise the funds, the necessary revenues to carry out the regulatory responsibility was through establishing the tonnage fees. And based on the most current information that has been on the amount of FPRs land applied, MDA has set the tonnage fee at $4 per wet ton. Next. So the second emergency action needed was to effectuate Senate Bill 1074 and House Bill 991. This bill amends two sections of the Nutrient Management Manual, which is incorporated by reference under COMAR 1520.0702. The first change amends section 1D of the manual, captioned the nutrient management requirement. The change primarily concerns the land application of FPRs. Under these proposed amendments, a person may apply only one time across a field per season. In the regulation, or excuse me, in the manual, there are 4 seasons, of which the winter season a farmer cannot land apply, but the other 3 being spring, summer, and fall, a farmer can apply. But under these emergency regs, they can only apply one time per season. The second change adds a new subsection under section 3 of the manual, which it's under animal manure and waste management, which more specifically adds the USDA NRCS Field Office Technical Guide for the waste storage structure 313. So there are standards and specifications through NRCS that on storage facilities that the storage facilities must meet to give to make sure that they are constructed properly and last for the life of the structure. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to the committee. If anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Mr. Harris, and thank you for the detail of going through these regulations. I just want to remind the public and the committee that the role of AELR is a part of a system of executive and legislative evaluation of regulation. We do not write regulation as a committee. We do not amend regulation as a committee. We are charged with determining whether an agency's regulations are necessary for the public. They're supported by statutory authority, judicial opinions, whether there are regulations that are obsolete and therefore they need to be changed, or that they are otherwise appropriate for amendment or repeal. Also, under the section of the code that guides this process, members are able to request specific hearings on pieces of legislation, pieces of regulation. And our committee member, Delegate Sample Hughes from District 37A, requested the hearing on these 2 sets of emergency regulations that we are hearing today. We have chosen to, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, to only have written testimony rather than oral testimony. So right before we start with questions, and I'll defer to Delegate Hughes, Sample Hughes, because she initiated this with the first question. But I've asked AELR staff to summarize the written comment testimony that we've received, so we're ensured that those voices are heard as a part of this proceeding. So if just very brief summary of the testimony that the committee has received. And I don't know if it's Georgia or if Kathleen is doing that.
I'll do it. Yeah, we received 6 pieces of testimony that were 4 in favor of the regulations. We had 6 that were against, and we had 1 that I was uncertain. The person was not happy with the application of food processing residuals, but she didn't say whether or not she thought that the regulations were appropriate. For the proponents of the regulations included Carroll County Commissioners, the Caroline County Commissioners, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and 3 individuals. And against were 4 organizations that proposed changes for the regulations, including Denali Water, the Maryland DC Composting Council, the Maryland Grain Producers Association, and the U.S. Composting Council. And also in against the regulations were One Farmer and the Delmarva Chicken Association.
Thank you. And then clarifying again that while we're not able as a body to amend, I think we noticed that there were the U.S. Composting and Engineering wanted to have some changes, right? Could you characterize that? Were among those that weren't supporting of the regulations as drafted? Could you tell us a little more about what some of the nature of the position?
Let me see.
So the engineering and composting.
I think the composting, some of it was definitional, that they didn't want, they wanted the definition of what a food processing residual was altered. Let me pull up some of the other. Just bear with me for a second.
So
Yeah. Denali Water Solutions had a whole list of things on different bonding requirements. They wanted clarification on the tonnage fee, the different permitting requirements of what transferring out of state was. There was just a whole list of things that Denali Water Solutions
again,
had suggestions.
Our record of supporters as well as people that have concerns. So now I can absolutely take questions from our members. And again, I would defer to Delegate Sample Hughes first if you have some reasons why you want this hearing and whatever else you want to provide.
Sure. Thank you, Senator Washington. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for the opportunity to have this meeting. What I would also like to say is that I am in the doctor's office and I could not change my appointment because this is the one I needed to keep. However, I also wanted to make sure that all were aware that this issue is very important to the industry. Certainly when the farming industry and the grain producers have new regulations and not have full clarity on some pieces of it. And I knew it was in the next phase of going to the regulation piece and us voting, that I really wanted to halt the process so we could get clarity on some of those. I know some of the members are going to bring up some of the very questions that may have been outlined in letters that in opposition that you have received. But in my phone calls that I have been receiving, dealt with the odor issue was one of them. Speaking of that is considered a nuisance, but it's in the law, but not in the regulation. There was also clarification on the combination of permits as well as the cost. And I'm glad to hear that the staff just a while ago talked about that, that there are for each one for, I think it was roughly $46,000. So to that end, it was the timing of having the information for the application process. That was number one concern. That's why we wanted to slow down the process. But then secondly, as I noted, some of the other concerns, we didn't have enough information to move forward. And then lastly, I was concerned that and I think we got 2 versions of the regulations from the department as of Friday, or is a newer one. But in that, it still speaks about the food residuals piece, and that, are we being asked to change that? Or does that have to be done through our legislative process? I didn't know if we had that authority to make those changes. And so I was just getting some clarity on that. Again, I will have my camera off listening to this physician, but I do want to say thank you again for today's meeting.
Thank you, Delegate Sample Hughes. I would just point out there are additional or amendments that have been submitted, as you pointed out, by the department. We believe, on advice of counsel, that the best way to consider those would be in a resubmission of the regulations, that they cannot be amended. We cannot take a vote today on an amended set of regulations. We can only vote on the regulations as they were submitted. Well, and we'll discuss that further at the end of the testimony or inquiries from members.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly. Who is next? What member is next? I can't see. Are there any additional members who have questions?
Sorry, Delegate Holmes, I had McComas and Jacobs.
Thank you.
Delegate Holmes, you're next.
I thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. I noticed in the application process that there are site plans required for this process. And my question, I guess, goes to the department in terms of the site plan review. Is the Soil Conservation District, or SCD, involved with the review of those site plans, because they are primarily responsible statewide for reviewing sediment erosion control, et cetera. And I was just wondering if SCD is involved in this at all. Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Chair.
To answer your question, for the nutrient management application of these products, it goes to the nutrient management program. It does not go through the soil conservation districts. There are trained specialists out there that write nutrient management plans. They're trained through the department. And then the requirement that site plan would include a nutrient management plan. The buffers that are also within the nutrient management regulations would also be required within that plan. So all that would be submitted to the department for review. But those would not, being a nutrient management application, the soil conservation districts do not govern over that.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, or you're good? Okay. Delegate McComas.
Thank you. I just have some basic questions, and you don't have to get too involved about it, but I guess because I'm not on environment and transportation, and the question is, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and then how is it going to affect the business community of the farming and the operators? And the other thing is this really an issue where we are becoming, Maryland is becoming impacted by people taking their stuff, their FDAs or their stuff to Maryland, as opposed to not dealing with it on their own state properties, like let's say Delaware, because I assume that this is major impact by the poultry processing plants, and that we are getting dumped on from other states to take care of this. And I'll just end this with, I know Harford County had a lawsuit for 30 plus maybe 40 years about a rubble fill. and that we were going to become the dumping ground for out-of-state rubble, let's say New Jersey, and it would be for a lot of construction product. That suit was decided against the state. And then it went back and forth and back and forth. But what I'm trying to say is I just kind of want to understand, why are we here? Now, I did read some of the testimony by the folks that had been impacted, and I was horrified. And I felt that the folks that are in Caroline County and Carroll County, they really needed to have some safety. But I'm wondering, are we going to have a problem with interstate commerce or anything like that? And just because I'm not familiar with how you deal with this. But I thank you very much. So if you could kind of answer the basics, that would be helpful for me.
I appreciate the question, and so just a little bit of background. FPRs are not just the waste streams that are coming from poultry. We also see it in the milk waste. We also see it in seafood waste that are approved by the state chemists as products that can be land applied, and then through the nutrient management plans that actually lay out what the limits are for these products to be land applied. In Maryland, poultry, for instance, I believe we have 2 processing plants on the Eastern Shore. Delaware may have 3. There's 1 or 2. There's a couple in Virginia and maybe a couple in Pennsylvania. I'm not sure. Delaware and Virginia do have permit programs. Pennsylvania does not. So a lot of these products were coming into Maryland and being land applied. These regulations, what they give the department some authority and some oversight into these products, into where these products are going onto farms. We have been inundated over the last few years with complaints from neighbors who are concerned about the volume of products that are coming onto the farms, the odor from the products that are coming onto the farms, the truck traffic on their roads and so forth. So we've been addressing these issues over a number of years, and I think the constituents had reached out to their legislators to this past year, and the bill that these 2 bills that were presented that we just talked about were the outcome of constituents' concerns and so forth. Our understanding is that these products, farmers are being paid to take these products quite substantially under the current regulation, under requirements for nutrient management, because but not all these products have a relatively low nutrient analysis. These products can be land applied multiple times to meet the nutrient requirements for a crop, particularly a corn crop. So a farmer can be, or an applicator can be out in those fields, depending upon the size, for quite a long period of time. And the longer they are out there, the longer trucks are coming in, the more time it takes to apply these materials, the odor continues to stay. And so we had required, maybe it was 2 years ago, we had implemented some new regulations to require the either injecting or incorporating these products into the ground. But it doesn't necessarily, if these products are being land applied multiple times, it doesn't give the neighbors or the communities in those areas much sense of relief. So these regulations, as I said, Delaware has a program. They actually only have 1 permittee in Delaware. In Virginia, my understanding, there's only 1 permittee in those states. So that kind of drives a lot of these products into Maryland to be land applied. We think through this legislation, it makes it a little more fair across the board. We anticipate that there may be less material coming into Maryland. So just also some additional background. There's about 1.3 million acres in the state where crops are being grown. Out of that 1.3, only about 7,000 acres, or a little over 7,000 acres, is where currently FPRs are being land applied. With these new regulations, because now a farmer can only, or an applicator can only apply 1 time, may require some more acres if we were to take all 7,000 or push some of these products to be land applied or utilized in other states. So we think this program actually makes it a little fair. It gives farmers still the ability to use these products. We think these products are important to the industry. It's part of the circular system where, you know, a farmer grows a crop, the crop feeds the chickens get processed, the waste stream goes back to the fields to provide nutrients to the next growing corn crop. So we think these products are important to the agricultural industry. They're important to farmers. They're important to the food processors out there. But it also gives a sense of relief to the neighbors who want to enjoy their quality of life because there may be some issues where the materials are being applicators and are in the fields for a very long period of time, and there doesn't seem to be a sense of relief throughout the summer or particularly around holidays or something, you know, around those issues. So hopefully I've answered your question.
Well, I can field your interstate commerce question. My name is Tom Filbert. I'm principal counsel here at the Department of Agriculture with the Attorney General's office. And in my opinion, there is no violation of the interstate commerce clause. And this is because as far as whether waste is generated in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, or Virginia, or Maryland, the impact or there is no discrimination. So it's going to be treated the same regardless of where the location of the generator is. It's going to be treated the same. So there's no violation, no discrimination with respect to interstate commerce. And as far as the changes that MDA has presented, one change was really a grammatical change that, quite frankly, when I respond to AELR Council, and that was a change with respect to Regulation 28. I believe it was a run-on sentence or something to that effect, and we just clarified that sentence, and that is something, quite frankly, that I believe that we typically are allowed to do. A more recent change was the definition of food processing residuals. I had discussions with Maryland, as well as the department, with Clean Water Action, as well as the Maryland DC Composting Council. And what I had indicated in that conversation is that MDA would submit a clarifying change to the definition of food processing residuals. And that was the slide with the yellow highlights indicating what food processing residuals does not include. And again, in my opinion, that was simply a clarifying change. The initial definition in the regulations essentially mirrors the statutory definition. And why it was important, perhaps, for a clarifying definition was to ensure that the programs that MDE administers with respect to compost, and that was really the concern from the Maryland DC Composting Council and Clean Water Action, that somehow that this new program that MDA would be implementing would override those two programs. And what I indicated in that conversation with Clean Water Action and Maryland DC Council is that my belief that this program, the Food Processing Residual Utilization Program, as well as the two programs at MDE dealing with composting, would have to be harmonized. That was not the intent of the legislature in adopting or enacting this new program to override those two programs at MDE.
Thank you so much for that. Again, we want to direct our responses, although absolutely clarifying, but we want to center on what's before us today. But thank you so much for that. Next would be Senator Mounts and then Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Should I get my hand down and I got my mute off? So my first question for the department is my understanding these regulations were supposed to have been in place July 1st. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be correct because the effective date of the legislation was July 1. Mm-hmm. And my advice to the department was to fully effectuate that legislation. Regulations had to be in place. And one of the slides talked about, for starters, that there needed to be a regulation to spell out the application process. So we pointed out 3 particular regulations that specifies what is needed to secure a permit for transporting food processing residuals and the information that needed to be included in that application, as well as the same for storage and land application.
Well,
So-
I guess the question is why are these emergency regulations when, I mean, the law was passed? What was the delay?
As far as delay, I mean, well, they were submitted in early July with the hope, quite frankly, that they would be approved by end of July, early August. And I mean, that was the purpose of going emergency, because as typically what occurs when you submit a proposed action, it takes upwards to several months to get them finally adopted. So they went emergency with the hope that they would be in place quickly, as opposed to the typical situation with a proposed action.
So the delay is just the standard process of putting the regulations together. There wasn't something that happened or some portion of the regulation that you were trying to deal with. It was just a standard process of putting the paper together and that sort of thing.
Senator Mouse, I think our committee staff can address that, around the standard.
Yeah, I guess the essence of my question is was there one specific area that was that caused a delay? And if there wasn't, that's fine. I'm not trying to, it's not supposed to be a super particular question. I was just trying to understand how we got to where we are right now. That's all.
Secretary Adams.
Thank you, and Senator, I appreciate that question. Part of the reason that it took a wee bit of time is that unlike many regulations that departments promulgate, we did solicit public input, and we did have to wait till the cycle of our nutrient management advisory committee could get back together, and then we did go back and forth with industry, frankly, with a lot of the folks who have submitted comments, pro and constructive comments. We went back and forth with them, took a lot of feedback, and also had to work internally because it's a brand new definition. It's a pretty hefty lift. It's also very important that we set these boundaries and set this construct.
Yeah.
So,
and this is a very difficult, tenacious area to regulate, in that, especially for my district where I have constituents who feel they can't even live in their homes anymore. And you have an underlying major industry, not just for the Eastern Shore, but the entire state of Maryland, and some of the things we deal with in the regulation. And so I want to make sure that we do this, it's done well, because if it doesn't go well, it can cause major problems. And we've seen major problems. I mean, just this year, we have basically destroyed our charter boat fishing industry. That's a huge hit to the Eastern Shore, and that was done through the regulatory process. And so, but along those lines, or to switch gears a little bit, the regulations require reporting, reporting. I've written down some notes, reporting annual implementation reports. And I understand that some of the farmers I've talked to have suggested to me that they already provide these reports and they already have to do this reporting. Do the regulations create a scenario for duplicative reporting? And what are the new reporting requirements for using FPRs? And that can go to anyone.
Sure. So I'll take a stab. So as mentioned earlier in the presentation, we feel that the majority of those who are going to be applying for permits are not necessarily going to be the farmers, but they are going to be the brokers or the commercial haulers and so forth. So they would be the ones applying. The annual implementation report is what farmers report to us at the end of the year. That gives us, field by or farm by farm data on how much nutrients of manures, organic, inorganic fertilizers, and so forth. The purpose of reporting, and back to what I mentioned earlier, is that this gives the department better oversight from the beginning of knowing where these products are going to be land applied. It's making sure that the nutrient management plan is written correctly for products are being land applied, and gives us the ability to make sure that these records are being, taken. These records are being recorded so that we can make sure that, for accuracy of the data, and making sure that, we have the correct oversight of the program.
So to understand that correctly, so the brokers would be filing quarterly reports. The farmers would be filing an annual report.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And, and there are some farm operations that currently store FPRs. And then later in the year, they will sell the FPRs. Would this, or not sell, but deliver them, transport them to other farms for use, for application? Would that current practice then be prohibited?
If the product, well, two things. If the product is leaving and going to another site, that other site is required to be permitted. So, it can't just go anywhere in the state of Maryland. It has to be, or to another farm, it has to be permitted. What was the second question? Apologize. I forgot your second question. I apologize.
Well, no, it's so the farm operation, they currently store the FPRs, and then they'll deliver them to other farm operations later in the year. And and your response is that that could occur. However, the receiving farm operation would have to have a permit.
It would be required to have a permit. That site could not be used if the products were going to a site that's not permitted through our department. So, for instance, it couldn't go to another farm in Maryland that's not being permitted, nor could it go to an out-of-state operation, because those out-of-state operations are not permitted through the Department of Agriculture.
And for those farms that are using those FPRs, are they already required to have a permit, or can they receive the FPRs and use them without a permit?
No, right now we do not have a permit program in place. So,
and how much?
Also wanted to also make sure was that the storage facilities that were being used are, not only they permitted through the department as making sure that they meets specific NRCS standards, but they are also that the counties themselves are aware of these storage sites and approve, the allowances of these facilities.
Okay. And so those farm operations that are using the FPRs, how much would that permit cost for those operators?
The permit, $175.
So that'll be a new, they'll have to go out and apply for 170.
Yes.
And then in some counties, as I understand, I'm not the expert and quickly becoming, but some counties have regulated the use of FPRs, others have not.
For the storage.
Sure. And so how would that work with this regulation going into effect? So in those counties where they already have permitting and they are for the storage, they've got the permitting for the storage, how would that affect operations in those counties?
Sure. So under these regulations, the permittee or the applicant would have to provide, the designs and so forth of the facility. They also need to provide some approval by the county that these sites can be used. I will say this, when July 1 came around, we provided some interim guidelines for farmers and the industry to continue to use these types of products. We recognize with the storage that it's going to take a little longer for these products, so that once these regulations go into effect, we would again provide some interim guidelines to allow for those farms and those applicants to get, whatever's required or requirements within the permit to get them to the department and give time for the department to review and be able to issue those permits.
So they would then get a local permit and a state permit?
No, it would just be a state permit.
And the local,
if I can jump in, so not all counties require permits. Some do, some don't. So and I would point out as well, as far as this regulation, that regulation actually is consistent with HB 991 and Senate Bill 1072, because those statutes actually require what MDA is doing by regulation. And that is that if there is a county approval process, that MDA, before it would issue a permit for a storage structure, would have to be ensured that the person who's applying for the storage permit at MDA has gone through whatever county approval process is necessary. So that's all that states. And again, that's consistent with the state law. So MDA's regulation just implicates, or I'm sorry, effectuates what is required by statute.
Senator Mounts, it's my understanding, I believe the terminology is that they would have to, and I believe these are good, important questions, and thank you for your insights, that they have to provide evidence, right? And so the evidence seems like it, yeah, so just, I see the terminology, evidence showing that the structure meets certain standards. And so I think if there needs to be further clarification on that, so that also in terms of a process, remember that these are emergency regulations and that the final or the formal regulations can be developed concurrently. So the lessons in this meeting and the lessons that we're seeing through the implementation of the emergency can be improved in the final version of the.
And Madam Chair, you just took my last question. My last question was going to go to the secretary, because these were supposed to be ready July 1 and they weren't. And so we're at AELR. And so my question to Secretary AEX is, with the promulgation of final regulations, can you expedite that process? Can you avoid waiting the time that the emergency regulations are allowed to stay in existence and start that process sooner than later, so that we don't have to wait until until a deadline? Can you begin that process sooner, to sort of play catch up, I guess, or to get some there's going to be some issues, I presume, and are you preparing to do that, or what is the philosophy of the department on how to move forward with these regulations? I guess that may be outside the scope of the hearing, Madam Chair.
No, we're on the same. I was just letting you know that it's my understanding that it is occurring concurrently. The secretary can certainly answer that, but that's my understanding, that we will not delay this.
That is correct, and I apologize for being off camera. I've had to go mobile to get to another meeting in DC. I will say that we have been working on these concurrently. The goal, as Hans and Tom mentioned earlier, was to hopefully have the emergency regulations enacted ASAP, and then we would have a little more time to essentially field more questions, concerns, given the fact that this is, as was noted, a pretty big regulation. So we do have the regulations drafted. They are, we have those ready to go. In the meantime, Senator, that we do have operating procedures in effect, as Tom, our attorney, said, just to make sure that we can move forward as statutorily allowed in the interim.
Thank you. And then our final question, Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I got a couple of questions. Hopefully it'll be pretty quick. In the beginning, when Delegate Sample Hughes started speaking, she brought up the odor issue, which I don't recall odor appearing in the bill. And I have concerns about this, the odor, in regards to the Right to Farm Act. So can you point out to me where MDA has the statutory authority to regulate under based on odor? Because I heard you bring it up today, Hans, and that's the reason why I'm asking the question.
Well, I guess I can field that, and I'm doing this. I'm looking at 8-8A06 of the legislation, and it indicates this statute speaks of when the department may not issue a permit to an applicant. And it specifies that the department may not do so if the department determines that the applicant cannot utilize food processing residuals without causing an undue risk to the environment or public health, safety, or welfare, or otherwise violating this subtitle. So then we also had a definition in the regulations, but the idea, and I think we brought this out at the advisory committee, there is a right to farm law. And again, the department's intent was to harmonize this statute, this new program, with respect to the right to farm law. And what was indicated at the right to farm law, and at that meeting, was that to the extent that these odors would create an undue risk to the public health or safety or welfare, so as to create a nuisance, that MDA would have that authority to step in. As I think Senator Mounts mentioned, there was an incident in Trapp, Maryland, with respect to food processing residuals that was being applied to a farm in that area. And there was under the right to farm law, there was a hearing before a particular entity that was set up to hear that. And the Department of Health spoke at that particular meeting of that body. And again, this concept, this idea is that to the extent that odors create an issue that would constitute an undue risk to the public health, safety, or welfare, that MDA would have the ability, and in my opinion, that would have created such a nuisance that MDA would have the ability to take action in that instance.
I appreciate that, but and I know odor was a big part of this whole issue being brought when the whole issue was brought forward back, and when I learned of it in January, basically. But odors are subjective, and I'm just wondering, who's going to determine whether there's an odor problem. I mean, what do we use as a gauge or reference point? That's the part that I'm concerned about, because like my wife can smell something that in the house that I can't smell anything. You know what I mean? So certainly odor, the detection of odor is very subjective. So I'm just wondering how all that's determined.
So Delegate Jacobs, we have regulations that require that these products be incorporated or injected, and we incorporated those requirements a couple of years ago. When you can put these products underneath the surface of soil, you smother the so-called odor. But it has been a big concern amongst the communities out there, and like I said before, we still think these products are important to the ag community, to the farmers who use them. Every complainant that we had received said, we support farmers and we recognize that there are some, issues that, you have noise, you have odors and so forth. But these regulations through that came out, that we wrote up, that came from the legislation, and we stayed within and met the intent of the legislation, puts some guardrails in place to help, again, minimize those issues, still give farmers the right to farm, still be able to utilize these products, still gives the industry the ability to continue to function, to be able to take these waste streams and still continue to land up, some of those, again, those issues or odors or whatever that may come along that farmers, that neighbors may be raising some concerns. I think all the neighbors that we had talked to who had some concerns, if it was for a short period of time, farmers out there, applicators out there, fine, but when it goes on weeks and months on end, it becomes problematic.
And maybe one further comment. So Hans mentioned one of the slides with dealt with 1520-0702, and that was supplement 10 to the Maryland Nutrient Management Manual. And a requirement that would be adopted under that amendment would limit the number of applications per season per field. So MDA believes that with that one new requirement, that a person applying food processing residuals can only apply one time per season per field. And in conjunction with that, utilize that, require a planting of a crop within a certain time frame. So that requirement, as well as the incorporation or injection, that quite frankly, the desire is that there won't be any nuisance complaints. That it would be the remedy to address potential or limit the possibility of nuisance complaints. So this may be a non-issue with that adoption of that one application per season per field, plus the incorporation or injection. So those limitations with respect to the use of this product hopefully will remedy or limit any future complaints of the utilization of this product.
And Delegate Jacobs, I guess a very short and direct answer to that question is that MDA recognizes that agriculture comes with odors. And so as a result, in no way would we revoke a permit or not issue a permit simply for odor alone.
Yeah, I understand all that. I'm just, you know, I'm very, very much aware of the whole odor issue. I just, you know, how you determine that is what I guess.
I'll be
In this particular case, I mean, the people that complained in Caroline and Carroll counties obviously had a terrible odor issue. You know, that was part of their whole issue of what we're dealing with here today. But I just trying to get some clarification on how we determined. That's all. And I appreciate your answers. I just have one more different question.
Before you continue on, I'll just utilize my public health background and just to add a little bit to what MDA has said, and just that they're considered odor pollution and industrial odor pollution, and so that there are specific measures and things around, you know, how long the odor is. It's less, but some of the risks that can be dermatological, there can be asthma, the extent to which the odors have particulates associated with it. So it's not really simply just for that background, that there is such a thing as industrial odor pollution that's recognized by the Institutes of Health, and that is a part of a number of state codes. So that's all I wanted to say. So please go to your next question.
All right, thank you. So with the transportation permits, my question is, would they be required for FPRs generated in the state, then hauled out of state for composting, storage, or land application?
No. If this is only for products that are being delivered to Maryland farms.
But that's what
the state, it would not require permit.
Yeah, that's what the reg said. It was within the state. I just want clarification.
Yes.
All right, thank you. That's all my questions.
All right, thank you all very much. And again, I wanna thank everyone for your questions. I thank the department for your time and clarification, and staff. So that's the end of the questions. Delegate Rosenberg will take it on to our next section.
Thank you, Senator Washington. In light of several factors, the additional or the amendments, the changes that the department has submitted to these emergency regulations, the issues that have been raised today about the regulations, and also given the fact that the law is in effect because of the operational procedures, that instead of taking a vote at this time, we're going to hold off on that. The senator and I will expedite discussions with the department so that we can move forward in a timely manner with revisions to these regs at a minimum. That would be the amendments that have been proposed by the department on the advice both of our staff and council. We think it's best to proceed with an amended version of this emergency regulation, not to adopt and on a separate, that that the regulations need to be amended, submitted, go through the process, as opposed to passing it now, amending it later, if that would be the will of the committee. But we want to have an expedited meeting with the department, and then they would then move forward with we expect a revised version of these amendments. So, they're not being desire, at least on the part of the chairs, to have a committee voting session at this time. I would seek a motion for adjournment.
Do you have a second? Yes, thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you all.
See,
Aye.
I see the secretary has raised his hand. Does he
Oh,
want to say something?
okay, sorry. Thank you for that. Secretary Adams.
I want to say thank you for the hearing, and we look forward to whether we're resubmitting emergency regs or jumping straight to the final.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. And again,
Thank you.
very much. We will be following up on this very shortly. Thank you for your time, and this meeting is adjourned.